Hey folks, so in this video, I'm going to be making a jig to cut circles with my router. Now, I had already shot this video and I'm redoing the intro because in the video, I made the jig out of 1/4 inch plywood. And the problem with this is my plunge router is pretty heavy. It's a full-size router. In order to cut the circle, the router has to hang over the piece by about 50%. So that's a lot of weight. And what was happening with this 1/4 inch plywood is, I don't know if you can see it, but it was flexing. I don't know if you can see it flexing. And when it would flex like that, it would make the bit dig in more on the bottom than the top, and that's no good. So I just want to tell you that if you make this jig, you got to do 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch. 1/4 inch is no good. Maybe for a smaller jig for a trim router, it might be okay, but not with the full size plunge router. So you're going to hear me say 1/4 inch in the video, but disregard it. 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, much better. All right, enjoy the video. Okay, to get started, I got myself a piece of plywood. I think it's about 30 inches long or so. Yeah, about 30 inches long. So I can make a 60-inch circle with this, about give or take a few inches. And then I found the center of the board and I drew a line down it. Then I grabbed my plunge router base and I stuck it at the one end. And then I found something that had a diameter that suited me, which happened to be this can of putty, I think it was. And I placed that at the other end of the piece of cardboard. And then what I did is I drew a half circle around the router base and then a half circle around that can of putty. And then I took a straight edge and connected those dots. And that gave me the shape of what the template is going to be. So I'll be cutting that out with the jigsaw. Then on my center line, I marked the increments, inches. And you can do this in one of two ways. So my router, it's kind of hard to see in here, but there's that black ring. And on that black ring, there's some points on that ring. And when I laid that on my template, I marked where those points were, and then I connected the dots on those points, and that gave me the center of my router. And then you can cut your hole out for your router bit to go through. Now, when you're measuring out your inches on your center line, you can either go from the center of that hole, or if you know what size router bit you're going to be using, and you're always going to be using that router bit, you can go from the outside of that router bit. This way you have the actual dimensions of the circle you'll be cutting, and you won't have to do any math to subtract the 1/8 inch or whatever it is. And then you just take a ruler, lay out your marks on your center line there. So for this jig, the smallest circle I could probably cut with a full-size router is probably like a 12-inch circle. I'm going to be doing a 22-inch table, so that's an 11-inch. The radius is 11 inches, so I would drill a hole at 11 inches, punch a pin through it, and then that pin would go into the material I'm cutting, and I would swing my circle around from that. So once you get all of your increments laid out, then you can cut this out. Jigsaw, bandsaw, whatever is easier. I only have a jigsaw, so that's what I'll be using for this. So the shape of this template, I guess, could be anything you want. I was opting for a thinner shape just so I could, swing it around my material without hitting clamps or whatever I'm holding my material down with too much. Okay, so I have an 1¼ Forstner bit here that I'm going to use to drill the circle out of my pattern here, out of my jig. If you have a bigger bit, you probably want to use it because it lets the chips come out a little bit easier. It's a bigger window to view with. Unfortunately, an inch and a quarter was the biggest I had, but I'm just going to use that. You can always draw a circle and jig it if you wanted as well. That would work just fine. But I wanted a nice clean circle, so I'm going to use the inch and a quarter. And then once we get this drilled out, then just cut the template out with your jigsaw or bandsaw. Like I said, I'm going to use a jigsaw because I don't have a bandsaw. And then we can move on to laying the pattern out on the bottom of your router. So I have a cordless jigsaw, but it was in the truck and I didn't feel like going outside to get it. And I had this Bosch laying around, and you know, this Bosch is probably 20 years old, but I just forgot how smooth and nice it is to use. Just so much better than the cordless. Just a real pleasure to use. All right, so the reason I am making this jig is my next project is going to be a white oak end table. And this end table is going to have a round top, and then it's going to have a smaller round shelf on the bottom. So if you'd like to catch that build, hit subscribe and the notifications bell. Thank you for the support. It's really appreciated. So once this pattern or jig is cut out, I'm just going to take it over to the stationary belt sander just to smooth it out, clean up the edges a little bit, just so it feels good in your hands. There's no splinters or anything. So yeah, once around on the stationary belt is plenty good. Okay, so here I have my jig flipped over to the bottom side, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my block sander, my hand sander, and I'm just going to knock that sharp edge off. So when you swing it around your material to cut your circle out, it doesn't catch on anything. It should just move nice and smoothly. So just knocking off that edge will do that. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm taking the base plate off my router so that I can use the base plate to lay out the screw pattern onto my jig. Now, the way this base plate is mounted now, it has panhead screws, which I believe the panhead screws. It has a flat bottom. So the holes that I put into my jig are going to need to be countersunk with a Forstner bit, because like I said, these screws have a flat bottom, not a tapered bottom, where you could use a countersink. So I'm going to drill a pilot hole the size of the screw, the threaded part of the screw, and then I'm going to use my Forstner bit to put the countersink on there so that the panhead screw can be below the surface and not drag on the material. Now, you know, your router might be different. You might have the tapered screw where you can just use a regular countersink bit and countersink it into your material. But again, I'm just going to use a Forstner bit here to do it. And once I have the hole drilled out, I'm just going to take the screw upside down and just check the depth to make sure it's deep enough to be just below the surface there. Then the only thing left to do is attach the jig to the router base and give it a test run. Okay, so here's the completed jig. Like I said, the 1/4-inch plywood was no good. This is 1/2-inch birch. And I put these blocks on here thinking I might want to spin it like this, but that was no good. So I'll probably knock these off. It's better just to use the router to spin it around. All in all, it probably took maybe 20 minutes to make this if you take all the filming out. And, you know, this was some scrap 1/2-inch plywood that I had laying around. So it really didn't cost me anything. And I think the Rockler is about $60, somewhere around there, $50, $60. Maybe it's 40 something. But again, it was pretty simple to make. So give it a go, and thanks for watching.